Still working? Waiting for that to turn on. Well, how's everyone doing this evening? Trying to hold it together. Well, I don't know if we're going to have any more. We got a number out, a number down, a number probably doing Mother's Day stuff. Who knows? Doing okay. Okay. Doyle?
Just noticed today is the 73rd anniversary of my baptism.
Oh.
On the exact day, it was on a Sunday, so the calendar doesn't always fall that way. The very next day, the Waco tornado came on. And we'd be tomorrow, 73rd anniversary of that big tornado.
Okay. Well, it's an easy way to remember it, weirdly enough.
Yeah.
73 years. 73 years. 1953. When the 11-year-long Korean War ended. Never mind. Okay, this evening, we're going to be in Matthew 18 for one, maybe a short other one, depending on where we end up, because this one's going to be a little more contextual to the chapter the parable's found in. But we're going to be starting in verse 21. The parable actually begins in 23. Okay, I don't see why doing that would close the app. That was fun. All I was doing was scrolling through the end of the chapter. Well, let's start in verse 21, New American Standard 95. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times. Matthew 18. This is a pretty famous question. We kind of I will allude to this and the response a number of times. So it's important to point out, Peter is actually following what the general thinking of the religious leaders of his day were. The idea that you would forgive someone 7 times was considered to be more than generous. Because, come on, they do something to harm you once, okay, twice, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, right? 3 times is a pattern. 7 times seems incredible. And what does Christ reply? I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. 70 times 7, so 490 times. For those keeping track, that's what he says, right? Well, technically, yes. But it's meant to be hyperbolic. It's meant to be, frankly, when should you forgive? How often should you forgive? Yeah, every time. And it's in this particular context that he begins the parable. But it's also in the greater context of what he just talked about, which we'll come back around to, that sparked Peter's question in the first place. I'm kind of taking the chapter and doing it out of order on purpose for, suspense, right? So let's get into the parable, and it should be one that's pretty familiar to at least. It's not probably one of the most famous ones, but it's kind of mid-tier. Verse 23, for this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he had begun to settle them, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. But since he did not have the means to repay, his lord commanded him to be sold, along with his wife and his children and all that he had, and repayment to be made. So the slave fell to the ground and prostrated himself before him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will repay you everything." We're in Matthew 18, now at verse 27. And the lord of that slave felt compassion and released him and forgave him the debt. But that slave went out and found one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii, and he seized him and began to choke him, saying, "Pay back what you owe." So his fellow slave fell to the ground and began to plead with him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will repay you." But he was unwilling and went and threw him in prison until he should pay back what he was owed. So that doesn't accomplish much. So when his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were deeply grieved and came and reported to their lord all that had happened. Then summoning him, his lord said to him, "You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not also have had mercy on your fellow slave in the same way that I had mercy on you?" And his lord, moved with anger, handed him over to the torturers until he should repay all that was owed him. My heavenly Father will also do the same to you if each of you does not forgive his brother from your heart. Okay, so, on its own, we have this account of basically a double standard that's being broken here. But remember, this was just in response to Peter's question about what? Yeah, how many times do we forgive? Forgiveness. Sorry. Let's break this down the way we normally do. We have some differing figures in this particular parable. Who do we have? Okay, the master or the king. I think my translation will say king, but king. Okay. I'm going to fix that G. Who else? Okay. Servant 1, which will serve as our, I'm going to say, perspective character. I'm going to put PC like that. He's the one that kind of is what is focused upon. The king interacts with him, and then he goes and interacts with servant 2. Yeah. Yeah, servant number 2 who owes him. So I'm going to put an arrow to him. You've got the rest of the servants as a class, and then you've got the idea of prison, and then the torturers, which is kind of builds up on that notion. You also have the money involved. You have one debt of 10,000 talents, and there's different ways of measuring talents. The footnote I have puts it in terms of a talent is worth more than 15 years of wages for a laborer. So however you want to quantify this in terms of monetary value, and I've seen a lot of different numbers. Like if you try to account for its weight, which there's debate over in gold, and how much gold weighs now and how much it costs, it's in the billions. It's possibly trillions. It's a ridiculous number. But if you put this in just purely connected with labor, output, a daily wage, the common daily wage of a laborer, that'll fit well with the other amount. The other amount was what? That he owes him, the second slave owed him 100 denarii. That's the first one. So 100 D. If we put this in terms of a denarius was the common daily wage. Now you think that's kind of crazy. They didn't have floating scale of wages and various things. Well, for common laborers, it was pretty flat. You'd had day laborers that came and did such. It's usually enough to get you your daily bread and a little bit more to get by. Subsistence living, maybe a little bit better. You didn't have refrigeration or various other things, so you tended to work for the day and get your food for the day, or make your food for the day. If it's either bread you buy or flour and oil and such to make your own. So 100 days, 100 denarii would be 100 days' work, which isn't even a third of a year. That's like a little over 3 months, like a quarter's worth. So in terms of trying to put these in, let's take some really rough numbers. This is not quite a third of a year, but let's just say, let's make this 1/3 of a year's equivalent of wages, okay? And a talent is supposed to be 15 years' wages by itself. Let's do a little multiplication here. How many years' wages is 10,000 talents then? I believe you're correct. With my quick math here, that would be 150,000 years worth of wages. And that's probably the better way to try to relate this. In terms, it would take him a ridiculous amount of time, more time than he could live, obviously, but more than is recorded history by a factor to repay the one total, yet he's demanding 1/450,000th of that. Okay. Now, why does this? What's the underlying theme that goes with this entire parable? What is it about? Okay, forgiveness, and specifically, okay, a degree of magnitude. Well, how does that work? I'm going to put this, I still have it on the other page here, but we were running out of room. How does this relate in any way to, there's certain questions that rise up. How does the king find himself in this position in the first place? Why does a servant owe 10,000 talents? How does a servant run up that big of a debt? How does that even happen? Oh, okay. I like that. It was gambling. It was kind of like the prodigal son from last week. He burned it on loose living. I love his plea to the king. Oh, just give me a little time, and I'll pull it together. The guy is stressed out enough. He's wanting to get his 100 denarii from the other guy. I don't know where he's going to come up with 10,000 talents. But he's pleading. He's pleading. Was the king behaving inappropriately in any way? Was the king's demand for repayment untoward? Was it illegal in any fashion? Was it immoral, unethical? Okay. And yeah, and again, all that triggers it is a king who wished to settle accounts. Seems that this king has all this outlay, and he just decides one day, hey, I'm going to make things right. I'm going to make the ledger balance. He has a whole lot of accounts receivable out there. I think that's the right term for it. Is it accounts payable is what you have to pay. Accounts receivable is what you're going to collect, right? It's been a while. He's wanting to pull that in. The implication is maybe the servant taking advantage of the king, he just keeps spending. I don't know. There's so many details you're like, I don't know, but it creates the situation. How is that? See, this is going to begin with the kingdom of heaven. It's one of the kingdom of heaven parables, of which there have been many we've been looking at. The kingdom of heaven is going to relate to this in some fashion. So we have to take this physical example. Remember, parables are physical demonstrations of a spiritual truth. What's really going on here? What is this representative of? Maybe, okay, well. Okay, well, I mean, he's pretty much have it. I think we're done. No, but that's really good. And I'm going to kind of go through the pieces of it. The king is representative of whom? king is God. Okay? And what's the debt? Sin. Sin. That's interesting. That's interesting. Some may not see it that way. It's like, well, but there's no other possible thing this debt could be. It was in terms of something you have to pay to God. Excuse me. You can't pay him anything. He created it all. Now you're asked to sacrifice. Okay. And that's why he uses such a hyperbolically ridiculous amount of money as 10,000 talents. To be honest, I don't even know if the economy of the day, even under the Roman Empire, Rome herself could account for 10,000 talents. That's how much money we're talking about. It's a ridiculous amount. Possibly, but it's huge. Now, we've gotten into the realm of trillions, and we use that number, but that's mostly money that's theoretical on a computer somewhere, for better or for worse, and for worse. But in terms of real assets, having that much physical gold, it's crazy. Is it impossible? I don't know, but it's meant to create this notion of ridiculousness. The audience would have gasped at the thought of the number. That's just, what? Again, why would the king allow him this? Why would the king expect him to be able to pay for it? But it's also meant to relate the notion and the idea of, if you want to put it in terms of a ledger, if you want to put it in terms of weights and balances, if you want to put it in terms of good deeds versus bad deeds, how heavy is one sin? Sufficient to accomplish what? To kill the soul. What profit a man gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? It's because the soul's worth more than the entire world. And they're not relatable. Like, well, you're thinking in spiritual terms, you're thinking in physical terms. Yeah, because it's not a number. It's out of bounds. It's not there. And so the idea here, and this is what gets crazy. You think of the audience. Think of the audience. You're in that audience, and he's saying, and I just try to equate it to a modern equivalent. Sometimes, again, people try to put it in modern numbers and modern amounts, but it's hard to relate. But say, man is brought before his manager, and he owes his manager this money, and it's like 10 trillion. We go, oh, that's insane. No one could pay that. No state could pay that. Pick a number. 100 trillion, quadrillion, quintillion, sextillion, septillion, octillion, nintillion, decillion. Oh, a Googleplex. Okay, one with 9,801 zeros. It's a Google times a Google. It's error. And here's the thing. Whatever number you come up with, lighter than 1 cent. Because the ridiculousness of it is meant to put us in that mindset and that shock for just the weight of one, and then we put in all sins. Because what is the operative? We're talking about debts, and we're talking about interactions, but there's one other key, and it was stated earlier. I just didn't write it down. Forgiveness. Forgiveness of debts. Why would a king forgive such a ridiculously big debt? The debtor asked. Was the king under obligation to forgive? That's forgiveness. Whereas this is going to kind of, and people misconstrue this a little bit and use that word obligation. They're going to say, well, this parable is going to say we're under obligation to forgive because we're forgiven. It's still not that obligate. It's still a choice. Forgiveness is still a choice. No. No. And the idea of, oh, sorry, Kay? Okay. There's a lot that he's allowing, for a better term. The servant's forgiven. He goes to the other servant. He's demanding his 100 denarius. Now, this isn't actually a small sum for a laborer. It really isn't. If you think in terms of 100 days' wages, not quite a third, but it's been a while since I've looked at what the average overall income in America is, but I mean, if we pick a number, I just want to be arbitrary, let's just say like 20 grand. It's not a minor amount of money, but it's not trillions. Nope. It is 1/45th of a talent by our definitions. It's a fraction of a talent. And again, 10,000, 20,000, whatever it is, it's not like $100, but it's not $1 billion either. It's something that you do need. I think, and this is my opinion, you can do with it as you will. I think Christ picks 100 denarii instead of just one because he doesn't, if you lowered it too much, we should forgive everything, but this has some weight to it. And it's something that he needs to decide to forgive because he's been forgiven. But in terms of the harm caused him or the debt owed to him, it is infinitesimal in comparison to the debt owed to God. And when you start to relate this to sin, how is it possible, if sin has all this weight, if this debt is equal to a sin against God, well then what's the 100 denarii? It still has to be the same thing, but against our fellow man. Why is it so much smaller? Right. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and again, sin requires intention, though you can do it without thinking. It's more cognizance of different things, the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Sometimes we take offense over things that weren't intended to be, and that's where communication comes into play. But, and I'm trying to take this thread carefully, because I don't want to stretch the parable beyond its bounds. But the reason, getting back to the question of forgiveness, remember, it began with, how often should I forgive my fellow man? 7 times? Why would you not want to forgive your fellow man? If your brother, your sister, whomever, they did something and they have repented of it and they've come and asked your forgiveness, you want to restore the relationship, what prevents that? Why would you not want to have that relationship restored? What? Lack of trust? Okay. There's a certain wisdom. If someone has a particular temptation and they fell into it and it harmed you, maybe don't allow yourself to be put in the same situation or not trust them with a certain thing the same way. That's not the same thing as not forgiving, but also it helps them. There's certain elements of that, but it's a personal harm. Okay? Pride. Okay, okay. It hurts because there's a voice, there's a certain element of wanting things to be right, to be worked out. So there's a tendency to want justice for others and grace for oneself. I don't want, okay, and this is where I want to be careful with where this is going. I'm only trying to take this so far, and I don't want this to be misconstrued, okay? But the reality is, the worst thing our fellow man can do to us is in this earth. They can hurt us physically, emotionally. I guess the worst thing they do is kill us. But they can't destroy our soul. Which means, ultimately, whatever offense, the worst possible thing that can be done to you by another person in sin and its consequences, the greater offense is still against God. Does that make sense? So it might have this notion of, well, they said a mean thing to me. They hurt me. They harmed me. They harmed me greatly. They can grow. I mean, get that 100, the debt gets pretty big, but it's still not the same as what they owe their God. And what's the example that's being set here? Because again, it's answering the question, why is the servant punished in the end? Doyle? Okay, and that angered the king. Why? Can't you argue he's at liberty to do whatever he wants? The king can make a choice, but he can make a choice. That's not, what's the big deal? Cool. Sorry. Which sets up a concept, and it's actually back in the Sermon on the Mount as well. You will be forgiven in the manner you forgive. His outcome is not positive. He takes the other servant and sends him to the prisons, which is about the degree of authority that he had, is the implication. Now, debtors' prisons, and they've been around in different forms. They've been around even in common law in England. They're kind of crazy when you think about them because they don't actually gain you the thing that you want usually. Something that is not commonly known about first century prison is a lot of time it wasn't 3 square and cable TV. Unless family or someone came and took care of you, you starved to death. So now you're a burden on them. The idea of putting you in debtor's prison is to get your family, based on the familial relations and the family name and all the other obligations, to come and pay your debt for you. You're a hostage for the debt is what it is. Otherwise, you die, which is brutal, especially say you're someone who wrote off their family or the family wrote off, or you don't have any family. Guess what situation you're in now? It's like a loan shark coming and killing you. Well, they don't get any money. You get the satisfaction. So either you're causing pain or you're getting them to do that. He does that to his fellow servant. His fellow servant, who is in arrears, fine, does owe him something. And if you want to put this in terms of he did some kind of harm, but begs him and says, I want to make this right. Nope, I'm not giving you the opportunity. Same scenario, different answer. Others hear about it, angers the king, he gets dragged forward. Now, where does he end up? Does he go to the debtor's prison? He goes to the torturers, who torture him until the debt is paid. Well, that's going to be either those tortures are going to go for a while or, well, not a while. He's done. He's done for. He isn't. So, yeah, he's not going to be able to pay 10,000 talents. So now he's with the torturers, which is, what is that? Yep. He's never going to be able to pay it, but he was never going to anyway. My heavenly Father will also do the same to you. So unless you were thinking, well, maybe the king is someone else, he's relating it very specifically. Oh, and he is now describing this as servants to his audience. And by extension, those who would be his followers, especially when we look back a little in the chapter. The torturers. Well, in this parable, he probably eventually succumbed and died. But if we relate this to what Christ is really implying, this isn't something you ever ever ceases. This is condemnation. This is crazy. Jesus, what are you talking about? There's all those people out there that are evil and they do all these different things. I'm a good person. I'm one of your followers. You're saying I'd end up in this situation if I just didn't forgive my brother of the thing they did to me, which is minor in an eternal sense? Yes. Because if you can't forgive in the same manner you were forgiven, there's something very, very wrong going on. From the heart. What does that mean? Let's explore that phrase, because I was heading there, and that's good. That's a good segue. From the heart. I guess the inverse would be, what does that not mean? Just words? Okay. You can forgive in a different manner. You can forgive or give the impression of forgiveness in a manner outside of that. Lip service. Yeah, I know that they were sorry about what happened and they wanted to make it right. I told them it was fine, but I'm never dealing with them again. Yeah, I'll put up with them, but they're not my brother anymore. I will claim them before other people, but I'm not going to treat them the same way I used to. And then you go before your Father and want him to treat you the exact same way that he always has, and have that relationship restored when you've done far worse. Now, one thing I want to point out, this ends chapter 18. We go back to just before this, where we started our section in verse 21. It was kicked off by, how often shall I forgive? 7 times? Whew, that's pretty generous. Like I said, once, they do something once, that's shame on you. They do it twice, shame on me for putting up with it. 3 times, 4, 7 is, and he's like 490. 70 times 7, he's actually being hyperbolic. Continually forgive. Why? Because you want to forgive. You want to be in a situation. Now, there becomes the question, can you forgive the unrepentant? And that's a whole other discussion and different things. And in the sense that you can choose to let something go so that it doesn't overwhelm you, you can. But in terms of the relationship being restored, it does require them to make a choice to come back too. We can't force the behavior of others. But this is talking about someone who is asked for forgiveness. And we're not the judge, and we can't judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. We're not the ones that try to decide, well, that wasn't a true apology. That wasn't da-da-da-da-da-da. You want to forgive, because if you find yourself in a situation where you don't, you have forgotten how forgiven you are. Now, what is the immediate context that kicked off Peter's question? What is in verses 15 through 20? He may very well have been. Peter, we beat up on him, but he tends to be the spokesman for the group. What is that section commonly referred to as? That's a section on church discipline, which is a third rail topic sometimes among brethren, because we tend to do one of 2 things, and they're both wrong. We tend to glorify it and turn it into a checklist of how you deal with people that cause issues, or we avoid it because it's unsavory and we don't want to deal with any problems. Steve, yeah. here's the thing.
Can be projected onto, or
I would have to disagree. He uses the word ecclesia in this section, and it's one of the few times it occurs in Matthew. And you can translate that as assembly. You can. But it's weird, and it's simply because when it says in verse 17, tell it to the church, is a specifically phrase, ecclesia, the called out. It's a weird one, and he doesn't use it elsewhere. That's not proof in and of itself, but it's setting a pattern. But I'm not wanting to disagree on those terms, because I think the reason why it's a problem and why we tend to like to want to put it with them, and contextually it does fit the way they behave, but they had their own system for that. They would go to the elders of the town and go to the gate. I think it's because people have abused it, misunderstood it. It is a perfectly useful tool when you understand what the goal of it is. Okay? What is the ultimate goal of discipline? And the word shows up multiple times through it. It's restoration. The goal isn't to put people out. Church groups have used it that way. The goal is to confront sin, unrepented sin, damaging, leaven unrepented sin, and then protecting the body. But the goal is, with the shock, is always to bring the person back if possible. And it's at every stage. And this isn't the focus of the parable in our discussion, but I'll do the quick things. You have your steps, quote unquote. If your brother sins, go show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. That isn't really any different than the Sermon on the Mount in terms of, if you have an offense, an issue against your brother, go deal with it. If you have sinned against your brother, in the inverse, go take care of it before you make your sacrifice. And I think that's a general principle that carries. If we communicated our issues more, especially in terms of conflict, like I've said before, conflict isn't wrong. It's how we choose to deal with it that's our problem. A lot of times, I was offended by what happened. Oh, did you tell them? No, I told everybody else. I had a standing rule for a long time. If someone comes to me with did you know what? I was like, have you talked to X? Have you talked to the person? I don't talk to them, or we can talk together. That's high school lunchroom drama. Don't do that. The next step, take two or more with you, so that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every fact may be confirmed. That way, okay, this is someone you're saying that is caught in a situation, and they've admitted, it's more difficult when they don't admit it, but it's an admitted thing and they don't care. It's like, oh, I'm not going to deal with this. I don't need to do anything about it, and it's a problem. It's like, okay, I can't rely on my word alone. You bring two or three more. Again, this same situation, then you bring it to the body. Best done without visitors, because of legal reasons, all of the things. If that shock isn't enough, the whole idea is to try to confront, hey, you're not doing what you should be. We want you to fix this problem. Then you have to let them being you a Gentile and a tax collector, which that language fits more with the Gentile thinking, separate. But what is the goal every time? Is it, okay, we're going to confront him. And unless he begs his way out of it, we're going to find a way to kick him out. No. What's the goal every time? Restoration, bringing him back. Now I'm going to, then in verse 18, truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven, which echoes Matthew 16, a promise made to Peter. Now it's to the 12, interacting with them, which implies their position is going to be to reveal what God would want them to have. And then we hit verse 19. Again, I say to you that if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it shall be done for them by thy Father who is in heaven. And then verse 20, where two or three have gathered in my name, I am there in their midst. Ooh, can I skew another sacred cow while we're here? Contextually, where in the previous verses did we find two or three? witnesses to confronting in discipline. Contextually, verse 20 fits a whole lot better as those 2 or 3 witnesses, or those 2 or 3 gathered for the purpose of dealing with this problem. Christ is with them in the decision. You're not doing it arbitrarily on your own. Then, where 2 or 3 members are gathered together, they can worship. That has never been the intention of that verse. It would strip it of all meaning. But that's a sacred cow. That leads immediately into Peter's question. Well, and again, we've worked backwards. Consider this. Christ, and he earlier was talking about preventing the little ones and all these different problems, people that would cause trouble, and says, well, if you run into the situation with someone who is causing trouble, they're unrepentant, try to fix the problem, try to get it to them, and then we can bring them back and we can restore them. Weird that he would immediately ask, how many times should I forgive? How does that connect? Okay. That's a possibility. Someone that keeps caught in the same offense and they're struggling with it and those things, how do you regard them? I think this may be taking it to the next thing. Discipline, not as the goal to put them out. And here's the thing, the ultimate goal of separation is still restoration. It isn't, we're writing them off. It's the shock of being apart from the body, because the body is so important. If fellowship is such a strong thing, if this family is what it's supposed to be, if she's what she's supposed to be, and they're not a part of it, that should hurt them to want to be a part of it again, to fix things and to bring them back. You have restored your brother. But here's the thing, once you've restored your brother, how are you going to regard them? You're going to forgive. They're not going to be a pariah. Okay? Mm-hmm. He did. He stole himself was the expression that's used. Yeah, Onesimus ran away from Philemon, and now he's a brother. And no, that's a really good example, a practical example. That letter's a practical example of this kind of a thing. Does that make sense? The whole idea is trying to tie the whole chapter together. As opposed, remember, Matthew isn't just writing down, and here's this thing. Now I'm going to go over here and talk about this thing. Okay, I'm going to talk about this thing. They all flow together. Christ doesn't start talking about discipline in a vacuum, and you can make the argument, like I said, you can make the argument that fits their first century Jewish world, but it wouldn't have a whole lot of utility for them. He would be giving them a new guideline to follow for like a year, and then it would not apply. It has to have, again, he goes into kingdom parables. The Sermon on the Mount is another example of all these things. He's preparing them for something to come, if that makes sense. It has to have some utility. I don't know.
To maybe clarify something I brought up earlier, a lot of things, like there's also places where it speaks of the gospel being preached.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the gospel of the death, burial, or resurrection of Christ. It wasn't a different one, but it wasn't in its fullest sense. And maybe you can teach me here, I don't know.
I would be curious as
preached in the Old Testament.
okay.
It's all Christ.
In terms of good news, if you're speaking in terms of the message, the phrasing of good news, a good report.
So my point being, there's a lot that, how did they, I mean, like you're saying, this would not have been, they didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
He told them at least 3 times that he was going to be killed,
It's true.
buried, and rise again.
Possibly. But the one thought I have is you don't really have an example of the methodology of how to deal with those problems anywhere in those later letters, yet Paul does say to mark those who are false teachers, a little leaven, leaven. He gives them instruction to deal with people who are problems. So how? This is the methodology that was recorded. And it was recorded by Matthew well after the event, which would have direct import for the body, even if it was delivered by Christ before it came. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just saying that a lot of things, they wouldn't put two and two together until
It's true.
the church later on.
I think part of it is that it has been such an abused section by church groups, including us on occasion. Congregations and then the denominational, it's been such an abused thing that either we avoid it or and we forget the intention behind it. There is a time and place to confront things. Otherwise, you have to have a method for that, or else anything goes.
Unfortunately, I think, as a whole, the church is weak today to where it almost doesn't even apply. People leave and they don't even care.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
once they leave,
that
a lot of times it doesn't even matter.
and that's a greater problem, because like I said, the pain of being separated should be a shock. It should be such a great place to be, something you want to be a part of. The fellowship, not just the physical parts of it, the part specifically for members. And this can be a challenge sometimes when we want to invite visitors to things. But we should have stuff for ourselves. As a family, it should be something that is so intimate, so good, that if you can't be a part of it, it should hurt. And when we get so milquetoast about how we approach Christianity, and it's, well, this is the place I go, and you just go someplace else, it doesn't work. Yeah, I think that you're right. It's unfortunately a comment on where we're at, and I'm speaking generally, but it's been abused in the past. Back in the 80s, there were some famous lawsuits that really spooked some congregations when someone was put out, but it came down to a very simple thing that they didn't do, which, easy enough, you dismiss your visitors. Then you don't have an issue. But anyway, John? It's possible. It's possible. His
Peter was sometimes a little more.
He was reactionary. He is also, again, the spokesman of the group, and I believe says what the others are thinking sometimes. I think they goad him into it. There's another response that he'll have in Matthew 19 that is dumb, but is telling, and it just balances it all out. And there's a reason I approached it with this order in mind, because if we started with the discipline section, I don't think it would have ended in the same place. I wanted to get everyone in the focus of Christ is talking about forgive others, you will be forgiven the same way you forgive others, to respond to him asking about how often should I, to deal with the response of, well, what kicked this off? Christ talking about someone causing offense, how you deal with it, with the goal of restoring them. Well, once you've restored them, then what? Restoration includes not just letting them back in the doors and part of the club, it's a restoration of the relationship. Who are you to not forgive if God has? That's an incredibly high assumption to claim. Now, this has been kind of a heavy one. I didn't expect it to go quite this direction, but it's there. We're getting pretty close to 6, so any thoughts, any other things?
James did make some subtle things about mercy.
Yep.
You don't show or have mercy, you will not be shown it. And then at the very last verse of it, he says that who keeps the brother or helps the brother back from the error shall have a multitude. I'm loosely, I don't have it memorized. So I mean, I don't think it's just that that's the only spot.
No. You have the Sermon on the Mount. You have Paul gets into this. James gets into this. It's multiple places. Paul talks about being the least of the apostles, chief of sinners, yet he's forgiven. Paul had an attitude of, there were people who committed great offense against him personally and so forth, and he was like, I'm not going to dwell on this. There's bigger things. Okay, does anyone need Lord's Supper this evening? Okay. Well, we can figure that out after the prayer. Okay. Anything else that needs mentioned? We got the dinner on Wednesday, normal schedule, various things. The Everywide Singing is on Saturday at 6. And we have those that are prepping snacks and such for that afterwards, but keep that in mind. Guys, if you haven't gotten a thing in about songs you want to lead, think on that. We need to get those kind of figured out. So. All right, let's go to our Father in prayer, and we'll close for class. Father, we thank you for this time we've had to discuss and to look into this section. Help us to have hearts that want to understand it, but also take it to heart, the meaning behind it. It's one thing to get all the little pieces in the right places and have the right answers, but it's another to put it into practice. Help us to have hearts that are open to that as well. And we thank you for forgiving us. Help us to be people who are forgiving in the same manner, to be emulators of you and your Son. Be with our family here. Keep us strong. Keep us reflecting the light of your Son. And as we go back into the world, let's not fear the things around us, for our strength is in you. Let's not despair. Let's look at those as we are in this world with pity, and for those that we want to bring with us, souls that are lost. We thank you for this family. Keep us strong. Forgive us. We thank you for your Son and your patience and your love. It's in his name we pray.